Sarah Mitchell's alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 a.m., same as it had for the past 6 months, while she worked double shifts at the Memphis shipping depot to save for this moment. She pulled on her father's old maintenance coveralls, the grey fabric, soft from years of honest work, and laced up her canvas sneakers, the left one split along the toe from too many miles, walked instead of driven. The Helix Orbital Academy rose from the Nevada desert like something from another world, its chrome exterior pulsing with shifting light that made her squint. Sarah had dreamed of this place since she was 12, watching shuttle launches on her grandmother's cracked tablet while other kids played games. Now, at 23, she was finally here. The security guard at the gate lowered his visor as she approached on foot, his composite baton already half raised. "Looking for the janitorial entrance?" he asked, not unkindly, but without any doubt she belonged anywhere else. Sarah reached into her faded nylon tote, the same bag she'd carried through community college, and produced her acceptance letter folded clean at the edges. The scanner flickered twice, then spat out a badge with her name truncated to S. Mitchell and a red border that didn't match the Academy's standard blue. "System error," the guard muttered, waving her through without checking further. Inside, everything gleamed. Students drifted past on hover platforms, their carbon fiber suits embedded with biometric sensors, their movements smooth and efficient. Sarah's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as she walked, each step echoing in the vast corridors, lined with holographic portraits of famous pilots. A cluster of corporate-sponsored cadets noticed her first. Their suits were edged in gleaming cobalt, shoulder plates engraved with sponsor crests. One nudged another, lifting his palm to record. "Garage Sale Couture," he whispered, loud enough for her to hear. "Where's her tech gear? She looks like someone's delivery person." The laughter was quiet, but practiced. Sarah kept walking, scanning the wall-mounted maps until she found the orientation hall. She'd studied the Academy layout for months, memorizing every corridor from public photos online. In the atrium, a soaring chamber flooded with artificial sunlight, she found herself face-to-face with the Academy's most notorious cadet. Kyle Henderson stood at the center of a streaming rig, a third year known more for his social media following than his flight scores. His mic pin blinked blue, 2 cadets beside him wearing neural sync gear that flickered in time with his feed. He turned toward Sarah with exaggerated surprise. "Folks, looks like someone's here to clean the hibernation pods," he called, his voice pitched for performance. The drone camera hovered closer, focusing on her worn shoes. Should we tell security they missed one? Heads turned throughout the atrium. Someone recorded from above, tracking her movement like she was part of a staged comedy act. The stream overlay, updated live. "Meet Janitor Jane." "Should we launch her out?" Sarah said nothing. Her face remained composed, hands steady at her sides. She'd learned long ago that dignity was something you held on to, not something others could give you. She located the schedule display, found her assigned orientation room, and walked forward without pause. As she passed beneath the glowing archway etched with "Welcome to the future of human flight," the polished floor caught her reflection, a grey figure among all that chrome and carbon fiber. No logo, no shine, just quiet determination. The laughter followed her like static, but she didn't look back. She had work to do. System rejection. The training commons buzzed with activity when Sarah entered, rows of cadets locked into simulation. Feeds, voice prompts echoing through the air. Her name wasn't on the schedule display. Another system glitch, she assumed. When she approached the closest terminal to scan her badge, the screen flashed red with an error message. A cadet behind.
Her scoffed loud enough to draw attention.
"Nice try," he said. "Probably thinks she can hack her way into the simulator." The instructor, Commander Davis, never looked up from his monitor. Sarah waited a moment, then moved to find a seat, but the cluster of trainees in the back responded, without words. One slid his chair to block the aisle, another spread his arms across adjacent seats. The seats weren't taken, but they might as well have been barricades. Sarah found a spot on the floor near the wall, pulling out her tablet, a cracked device held together with electrical tape that she'd bought used from a pawn shop. Kyle's voice piped up from his handheld stream console as his drone cam swiveled into position. "Ladies and gentlemen, looks like we've got vintage tech today," he said, framing her tablet in close-up.
No neural interface, no retinal display, just a stylus and pure determination. She must have pulled this from a museum. Sarah opened the device and began taking notes, the stylus moving in quiet precision. The screen had a faint crack across the
upper corner, but it worked fine. She'd learned to make do with less. When class broke for lunch, she sat alone at a narrow table in the corner, eating a protein bar from her tote. Her badge still hadn't synced with the meal system, and the cafeteria staff had waved her off with practiced indifference. As she unwrapped the bar, a second-year cadet named Jessica walked past and accidentally knocked a smoothie container from her tray. It struck Sarah's tablet, coating half the screen in sticky green liquid. "Oops," Jessica said with sugary sweetness. "Slippery fingers, maybe bring a case next time." The mess went live on Kyle's feed within minutes, complete with slow-motion replay. Sarah quietly cleaned her screen with napkins, her expression never changing. She'd dealt with worse than this. That afternoon, her first official assignment came through. Report to Simulation Bay D for baseline evaluation. She arrived to find the room mostly empty except for Kyle and 2 other cadets, all wearing matching flight harnesses. A spare harness lay on the floor at her feet. "Baseline exam," Kyle said with his practiced grin, camera rolling. "Show us a textbook safety check for the audience." Sarah picked up the harness, examined it thoroughly, and secured it properly, unbuckling and rebuckling each connection to verify integrity. The process took less than a minute, her movements efficient and professional. The video went up before she left the bay, captioned "Janitor." Jane shows us how to buckle up for cleaning duty. The thumbnail froze on her face, unreadable against the fluorescent glare. Walking back through the corridor, Sarah passed a row of simulator pods she'd never been allowed to access. Most were powered down, but one near the end still hummed with activity, its door standing open. She stopped beside it, looking at the empty pilot seat she'd dreamed of occupying since childhood. Behind her, laughter echoed faintly. Kyle's voice, someone else's commentary, another joke for the invisible audience. Sarah stood completely still, and then she listened carefully to something else. The soft hum of the life support systems, the gentle whir of the gyroscopic stabilizers, sounds she'd studied in textbooks but never heard in person, sounds that told her these machines weren't quite calibrated correctly. The setup, the assignment notification, came at 6 a.m. sharp. Sarah Mitchell was scheduled for solo docking trial in Simulator Pod 12, an aging unit tucked into the corner of Bay 3 like a forgotten relic. Most cadets avoided it unless forced. Its external panels hummed at an offbeat frequency, and the internal display flickered between inputs. Today, it was hers. As Sarah approached the pod, she noticed the unusual attention. Kyle and his crew had positioned themselves at the observation deck, their streaming equipment already live. The camera angle focused directly on Pod 12 with a flashing banner reading, "Surprise Session. Can Janitor Jane handle docking?" No instructor greeted her. No tech crew ran pre-flight checks. The harness inside was 2 sizes too loose and smelled faintly of industrial cleaner. Sarah adjusted it wordlessly, noting the misaligned calibration warnings that no one seemed interested in addressing. What she didn't see was Kyle's team at work behind the scenes. Hidden from her view, they'd spent the morning overriding the pod systems, adding throttle lag, delaying inertial responses, injecting false navigation data into the heads-up display. From their perspective, it would look like pilot error. From inside the cockpit, it would feel like equipment failure. "This should be interesting," Kyle whispered into his mic as Sarah initiated the startup sequence. "Let's see if natural talent beats proper training." The simulation began normally. Sarah's virtual spacecraft approached the docking station with standard protocol, but as she made her first correction, the response lagged by a full second. She compensated only to find the craft yawed harder in the opposite direction. She tried adjusting pitch. The frame stuttered, the display glitched, then stabilized on completely false readings. The spacecraft was supposedly tilting into a dangerous spin, but her inner ear told her something different. The physics didn't match. "She's losing it," Kyle narrated for his audience. Maybe someone should throw her a life preserver. Inside the pod, Sarah's grip never wavered. She'd grown up fixing machinery that didn't work right, learning to feel the difference between real problems and false signals. This felt wrong. Not like pilot error, but like sabotage. A red flare streaked across her screen. The docking station vanished, replaced by a simulated debris field spinning at impossible speed. Moments later, the failure alert filled every monitor in the bay. The pod ejected her from the virtual circuit. Her restraints clicked open with mechanical finality. Behind her, the hangar erupted. Cadets laughed openly, a few clapped in mockery. Kyle slapped his console in triumph. And that, my friends, is what happens when wishful thinking meets orbital mechanics. Commander Davis didn't investigate the system logs blinking red with anomalies. He walked to his clipboard, peeled off Sarah's evaluation sheet, and tore it cleanly down the middle. "You're done here," he said casually. "This program isn't for everyone." Sarah stepped out of the pod, her posture unchanged. She looked across the room, not in accusation or confusion, but in quiet observation. Her eyes passed over Kyle, the instructor, the camera equipment. Her expression revealed nothing, but she was memorizing everything. A cadet near the back threw a flight manual at her feet. Another tossed her badge toward a trash bin with theatrical flair. "Oops," he muttered without looking up. Sarah bent to retrieve her bag, brushing off a smudge of dust. As she turned toward the exit, she passed. The status board, where one monitor still blinked erratically, caught between system resets. Her student ID remained frozen at the bottom of the list. SM01 terminal input error. What none of them knew was that Sarah had been taking notes the entire time, not just on procedures and protocols, but on system vulnerabilities, oversight, failures, and the specific sound a gyroscope makes when its calibration has been deliberately altered. She'd been underestimated before. She was about to make sure it wouldn't happen again. Hidden truth. 3 days after her failure, Sarah sat in the Academy's public library, one of the few places her student badge still provided access. She'd been researching, cross-referencing, technical manuals with the Academy's own published safety protocols. What she found made her stomach turn. The simulator logs were public record, required by federal aviation oversight. Pod 12's maintenance history told a clear story: multiple calibration anomalies, unauthorized system access, and modification timestamps that corresponded exactly with Kyle's streaming schedule. But there was something else, something that made her hands shake as she scrolled through archived personnel files. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just any applicant who'd been rejected. According to records buried deep in the Academy's founding documents, she was the daughter of Lieutenant Commander Robert Mitchell, one of Helix Academy's original co-founders, killed in a training accident when Sarah was 3 years old. Her father had designed the emergency override protocols still used in every spacecraft. His access codes, passed down through military inheritance procedures, were still active in the system. Sarah's truncated badge wasn't a system error. It was an incomplete recognition of her founder-level clearance. She'd been SM-01 all along, Sarah Mitchell, Override 1. The next morning, she walked into the Academy's administrative office, carrying a manila folder. The receptionist barely looked up as Sarah placed a formal complaint on the desk. 6 pages of documented evidence, system logs, and a request for investigation into simulator tampering. "I'll make sure someone sees this," the receptionist said, dismissively, sliding the folder toward a pile of other paperwork. But Sarah had also sent copies elsewhere. The Federal Aviation Academy, the Department of Orbital Safety, 3 major news outlets that specialized in aerospace journalism, and most importantly, the Academy's own board of directors, including the emergency contact protocols her father had established decades earlier. By noon, Commander Davis had been called into an emergency meeting. By evening, Kyle's streaming privileges had been suspended pending investigation. The carefully constructed narrative of Sarah's failure was starting to crack. In her small apartment off campus, Sarah received a call from an unknown number. "Mrs. Mitchell? This is Captain Rodriguez from the Federal Aviation Academy. We need to discuss your father's legacy protocols and your current student status. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" Sarah looked at her father's photo on the desk. A young pilot in a crisp uniform, standing beside an early orbital craft. She'd carried that picture through every move, every struggle, every moment when giving up seemed easier than continuing. "I'll be there," she said. For the first time in weeks, Sarah smiled. The real fight was just beginning. The investigation, the Federal Aviation Academy's regional office, was a stark contrast to Helix's gleaming surfaces, functional, serious, and built for purpose rather than appearance. Captain Elena Rodriguez was a compact woman with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing, her uniform bearing the patches of someone who'd spent real time in orbit. "Your complaint triggered an automatic review," she told Sarah across a plain metal desk. "Simulator tampering is a federal offense when it affects safety certification programs. But that's not the only reason you're here." Rodriguez pulled out a thick file. "Your father's emergency protocols are still classified at the highest levels. When he died, those clearances should have been transferred to next of kin, but somehow that never happened. The Academy has been operating his systems for 20 years without proper authorization." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. What does that mean? It means Helix Academy's entire override system, the thing that keeps their spacecraft from crashing, has been illegally accessed since 2005, and you, as Robert Mitchell's heir, are the only person with legitimate authority to operate it. The investigation moved quickly once federal agents became involved. Within 48 hours, they'd recovered deleted files from Kyle's personal devices showing deliberate simulator sabotage going back months. Other students had been targeted too. Anyone without wealthy sponsors or corporate backing. Commander Davis's records revealed something worse. He'd been systematically rejecting qualified applicants who couldn't pay premium fees, while passing unqualified students whose families donated to the Academy. Sarah's case was just the most obvious example because of her father's legacy codes. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Helix Academy. Fraud exposed. Founder's daughter rejected, sabotaged by elite students, ran across every major aerospace publication. Kyle's carefully edited streaming highlights were dissected frame by frame, revealing the orchestrated campaign of humiliation. But the real bombshell came when investigators accessed the Academy's secure servers. Sarah's failed simulation had triggered automatic backup protocols her father had designed, protocols that recorded everything, including the unauthorized system modifications that had caused her apparent failure. The data was undeniable. Sarah hadn't failed the docking simulation. She'd successfully completed it despite active sabotage that would have crashed a real spacecraft. By Thursday, Kyle Henderson was facing federal charges for tampering with aviation safety equipment. Commander Davis had been terminated and was under investigation for fraud. 3 other instructors were suspended pending review. Sarah received a call from Helix Academy's board of directors. "Ms. Mitchell, we'd like to discuss your reinstatement to the program, and perhaps other arrangements." Sarah looked out her apartment window at the desert where her father had once tested experimental spacecraft, where she'd dreamed of following in his footsteps despite every obstacle thrown in her path. "I'll consider it," she said. "But I have conditions. Power shift." The emergency board meeting was called for Friday morning in Helix Academy's executive conference room, a space Sarah had never been allowed to enter as a student. Now she sat at the mahogany table as board members filed in, their expensive suits a sharp contrast to her simple, button-down shirt and clean jeans. Dr. Margaret Chen, the board chairman, cleared her throat nervously. "Ms. Mitchell, we want to
formally apologize for the irregularities in your treatment.
We're prepared to offer full reinstatement, academic credits for your father's contributions, and a generous settlement for your troubles." Sarah opened her laptop, a newer model she'd finally been able to afford after selling her story to a documentary producer. "I appreciate that, Dr. Chen, but I'm afraid the situation is more complicated than you realize." She turned the screen toward the board. Federal Aviation Administration letterhead filled the display. As of yesterday, the FAA has revoked Helix Academy's certification to operate any spacecraft using the Mitchell override protocols. That includes your entire fleet of training vessels, your emergency systems, and your flagship simulation equipment. The room went silent. Board member James Wright leaned forward, his face pale. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that without my father's protocols, you can't legally train pilots for orbital operations. And as his heir, I'm the only person authorized to license that technology." Sarah clicked to the next document. "I've had patent attorneys review the original agreements. Helix Academy has been operating under an expired license for 2 decades. Dr. Chen's voice cracked slightly. "What do you want?" Sarah had spent 3 sleepless nights preparing for this moment, thinking about her father's intentions and her own dreams that had been nearly destroyed by institutional cruelty. "I want Kyle Henderson and anyone else involved in the sabotage prosecuted to the full extent of the law. I want Commander Davis stripped of his certifications permanently. I want the discriminatory admission practices investigated and reformed." She paused, looking around the table at faces that had ignored her existence for months. "And I want you to remember that my father created those safety protocols to protect people, not to make money for elite families who think space belongs to them." The board members exchanged glances. Dr. Chen spoke carefully. "And in return, I'll license the Mitchell protocols to a reformed Helix Academy, one that admits students based on merit, not money, one that doesn't tolerate bullying or sabotage, one that my father would be proud of." Sarah closed her laptop and stood up. You have 48 hours to decide. The FAA suspension takes effect Monday morning, and I already have 3 other aerospace academies interested in licensing agreements." As she walked toward the door, Dr. Chen called after her. "Sarah, wait, what if we made you a partner in the academy's ownership? A full voting member of the board?" Sarah turned back, her hand on the door handle. For a moment she thought about the girl who'd walked into this building in coveralls and worn sneakers, carrying nothing but dreams and determination. "Make me the Dean of Student Affairs," she said finally, "and we'll see how serious you are about change." Justice served. The live stream had 2 million viewers when Kyle Henderson was led into federal court in handcuffs. His usual confident swagger was gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone who'd finally faced consequences for his
actions.
The charges were serious: tampering with aviation safety equipment, fraud, conspiracy, and endangering student safety. Sarah watched from the gallery, flanked by Captain Rodriguez and 3 other students who'd come forward with their own stories of sabotage and discrimination. The evidence was overwhelming. Months of deleted files recovered by federal investigators, testimony from academy staff who'd been pressured to look the other way, and the damning simulation logs that proved Kyle's systematic campaign to destroy other students' careers. Kyle's expensive legal team had tried to frame it as a harmless prank, but the judge wasn't buying it. "Mr. Henderson," Judge Patricia Hawkins said sternly, "you tampered with equipment designed to train pilots for spacecraft operations. In the real world, the kind of sabotage you perpetrated could have killed people. The court sentences you to 2 years in federal prison, 5 years of probation, and lifetime ban from all aerospace facilities." The courtroom erupted. Kyle's parents, wealthy tech executives who'd funded his streaming career, sat in stunned silence. His former followers, who'd once laughed at his cruel pranks, were nowhere to be seen. Commander Davis received a lighter sentence: 6 months in prison and permanent loss of his teaching credentials. But his career was over. 3 other instructors were fined and suspended from federal aviation programs. The real victory came the following week when Sarah walked into her new office at the reformed Helix Academy, now officially renamed the Mitchell Aerospace Institute. As Dean of Student Affairs, her first act was to review every application that had been rejected in the past 5 years. She found dozens of qualified candidates who'd been turned away for arbitrary reasons. A brilliant young woman from rural Montana whose family couldn't afford the recommended donations, a former Air Force mechanic whose paperwork had been mysteriously lost, a teenager from Detroit whose simulation scores were higher than Kyle's, but who'd been rejected for cultural fit. Within a month, Sarah had established the Robert Mitchell Scholarship Program, fully funded by the patent licensing fees from her father's override protocols. The first class of recipients looked nothing like the old Helix Academy's student body. They came from small towns and big cities, military families and immigrant communities, all united by competence and determination rather than wealth and connections. On the day the new students arrived, Sarah stood in the same atrium where Kyle had once mocked her as Janitor Jane. Now it bore a different name, the Sarah Mitchell Memorial Hall, honoring not her, but her grandmother, who'd raised her after her father's death. A young man from Mississippi approached her nervously, clutching a folder of paperwork. His clothes were clean but clearly second-hand, his shoes scuffed from long wear. "Excuse me, Mom? I think there's been a mistake with my housing assignment. They gave me one of the premium suites, but I applied for standard accommodation." Sarah smiled, remembering her own arrival just months earlier. "No mistake. Every student here gets the same treatment, regardless of what they can pay. That's how it works now." As she watched him walk away, Shoulders straightening with new confidence, Sarah felt her father's presence in the corridors he'd helped design. The academy was finally living up to his vision, a place where the sky belonged to everyone brave enough to reach for it. New horizons. 6 months later, Sarah stood in mission control watching her first class of scholarship students conduct their final orbital simulations. The same Pod 12 that had been rigged to humiliate her now housed Maria Santos, a former bus mechanic from Phoenix, whose steady hands and unflappable demeanor had made her the top pilot in her class. Through the observation window, Sarah could see Maria executing a complex docking maneuver with spacecraft that genuinely malfunctioned, not through sabotage, but because real emergencies required real solutions. Maria's movements were calm and precise, adjusting for the craft's actual limitations rather than fighting phantom problems. "Beautiful work," murmured Captain Rodriguez, who'd taken a position as senior flight instructor. "Your father would be proud of what you've built here." The academy had transformed completely. Gone were the corporate sponsor banners and elite family portraits. In their place hung photos of successful graduates from the scholarship program. Pilots now serving on orbital stations, lunar colonies, and deep space exploration missions. The Hall of Fame included a former grocery store clerk, a retired Army sergeant, and a community college dropout who'd become the youngest person to manually dock with the International Space Station. Kyle Henderson's streaming equipment had been removed and donated to a technical school. In its place stood a memorial to the 3 astronauts who died in the accident that killed Sarah's father, a reminder that space exploration required respect, preparation, and humility. The Academy's reputation had improved dramatically. Federal aviation officials now used Mitchell Aerospace Institute as the gold standard for pilot training programs. Enrollment applications came from around the world, but admission remained based solely on competence and character. Sarah's own office was modest, the same desk her father had used during his brief time as an instructor, decorated with photos of students rather than awards or accolades. A framed letter from NASA sat beside her computer, offering her a position as Director of Astronaut Selection, but she'd politely declined. Her work was here, ensuring that space remained accessible to anyone with the skill and courage to reach for it. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Thomas Chen, no relation to the former board chairman, stood in the doorway wearing the blue jumpsuit of a certified pilot. He'd been one of Kyle's former followers, but after witnessing Sarah's treatment, he'd become one of her strongest advocates for reform. "Dean Mitchell? We just got word from the Mars Colony Transport Program. They're requesting 12 graduates from our advanced navigation course. Apparently, we're the only academy producing pilots who can handle manual docking procedures without computer assistance." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Her father's protocols emphasized hands-on training over automated systems, preparing pilots for situations where technology failed and human judgment became paramount. "Send them our best candidates," she said, "and make sure the selection process is blind. No names, no backgrounds, just performance data." As Thomas left, Sarah turned back to the window where Maria was completing her simulation. The young woman's face was calm and focused, completely absorbed in the delicate dance of orbital mechanics. When the exercise ended successfully, she didn't celebrate or boast. She simply ran through post-flight checks with professional thoroughness. Sarah remembered her own dreams at that age, watching shuttle launches on her grandmother's cracked tablet while saving every dollar for this opportunity. The path had been harder than she'd imagined, marked by cruelty and sabotage from those who believed space belonged only to the privileged few. But standing here now, watching students from every background and circumstance prepare for careers Among the stars, Sarah knew her father's legacy was secure. The Mitchell Override Protocols weren't just technical specifications. They were a promise that when systems failed and situations became desperate, human skill and determination would always find a way through. Outside the Academy's windows, the desert stretched to the horizon where rockets launched regularly now, carrying crews trained in these halls to orbital stations and distant worlds. Each launch carried with it the dreams of young people who'd been told they didn't belong, who'd proven that competence and character mattered more than connections and cash. Sarah picked up her tablet, a new model, but she'd kept her father's photo tucked into the case and began reviewing applications for the next scholarship class. Somewhere in those files was another small-town dreamer, another dismissed candidate, another person ready to prove that the sky belonged to everyone brave enough to claim it. The work continued, and the stars waited for no one. If you enjoyed Sarah's incredible journey from mockery to triumph, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Her story proves that sometimes the people others underestimate are the ones who change everything. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. Have you ever been underestimated or faced unfair treatment? Share your story with us. And if this story moved you, check out our playlist of other inspiring tales about ordinary people who achieved extraordinary things against all odds. Remember, your background doesn't determine your destination, your determination does.